So, as you have heard, the first presentation is really engaging with the critical dimension of Medemer. How did this term come into being? What does it mean, at least in the sense articulated by the person who came forward with the term, and the different iterations of the idea of Medemer, right? Christian's view is that, at least from work that he has done, I know he has gone through pretty much every speech that Abiy has made around this idea of Medemer. He tried to understand how the term evolved and what meaning it had at different junctures. So his view is that the Prime Minister didn't have a comprehensive, coherent idea of what the term means at the beginning, but as time went on, as the term is used and seeped into public parlance, he realized that there is something actually more to this idea rather than a random term that does a particular kind of work in a conversation. Okay. Now, precisely because the word is very much tied to the personality of the Prime Minister, the acceptance, the prominence, the significance the term had politically changed as people's view towards him changed. You find two categories of people: those who still think Medemer is a very important idea that we need to hold on to, and you find other categories of people who say this is just a fuzzy term, it doesn't mean anything in particular, it's not a coherent ideology, and therefore we shouldn't bother. But if you actually think of any major idea that helped organize political society around the world, whether it is democracy, justice, legitimacy, the states, freedoms, human rights, all of these ideas can actually be described as fuzzy concepts because they are always contested, they are always questioned in all sorts of ways. And it took them such a long time in order to achieve the kind of coherence, the kind of cohesiveness that they have today. So their political ontology did not develop over time. It took a very long time. And so my view, I think, is that instead of simply rejecting it, just because it is associated with somebody, or just because our opinion of that individual changed, but I think we need to take it very seriously and see what we can do with it. So what I want to do today is present an idea of Medemer as a performative concept, as a necessary fiction that could potentially help Ethiopia move forward. Do you think it's a good idea to characterize it as a fiction? Yeah? Or would it undermine, demean the significance of the term if we were to call it fiction? Huh? I want to start somewhere here. This is Montage, one of the most significant thinkers during the French Renaissance in the 16th century. And he has this to say: even our law, it is said, has legitimate fictions on which it founds the truths of its justice, he says. Just, I want you to pay attention to some of the key words here. Law, legitimacy, fictions, truths, justice. So for him, there's something about fictions that are essential in terms of grounding law, authority, and justice. And in the same text, he also talks about law. And he says, laws keep up their standing not because they are just, but because they are laws. That is the mystical foundation of their authority. They have no other. Anyone who obeys them because they are just is not obeying them the way he ought to, he says. So it's the mystical foundation of authority. That is to say, the political order, the state, had a mystical foundation. I think in Ethiopian context, we do know that the Ethiopian state is justified through a range of different types of measures. So have you referred to, for example, the Solomonic dynasty, and the kind of direct line that is linked between the Ethiopian states and House of David through King Solomon. And we have other sorts of mazes that are built around the edges of that idea. we often speak of, for example, or at least in certain segments of the Ethiopian public, we speak of the Ethiopian Amlak, right? So this is not kind of a normal kind of state, it's a defined state that justifies its presence in terms of an appeal to God. Now, it's not just the Ethiopian state, or it's not just ideas of law. Pretty much anything that has to do with public authority does have some kind of appeal to certain kinds of fictions. So the ways in which we go about rationalizing, legitimizing, explaining public authority, the question of why is it that an individual person should obey the state? And that question is often explained and justified in terms of certain kinds of fictions. That applies to even the question of justice. So starting from the ancient Greece, where people like Plato and Aristotle articulated the notion of justice, all the way through to some of the writings of, for example, the medieval Christian thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas, or Enlightenment period thinkers such as Kant, or pre-modern thinkers such as Hobbes, for example, or Hume, or contemporary thinkers who influence the thinking about question of justice today, people like Rawls. The idea of justice is very much underpinned by a range of different kinds of fiction. At least the way we go about justifying justice presupposes the existence of certain kinds of fictions. A key example is John Rawls's idea of the original position and the veil of ignorance. Now for him, the way in which he tries to explain his social contract theory of justice, the notion of justice as fairness, is through these two constructs. And he himself admits that these two essential constructs, in terms of articulating that theory, are basically devices of representations, he says. They are thought experiments that are designed to organize or consider the conditions of justice and clarify their implications. Without these two, or consider the conditions of justice and clarify their implications. Without these two thought experiments, the theory doesn't stand. It basically collapses. So fictions are always important. Now, I want to make some progress. If the political order that we have today, the forms of justice that we have today, are essentially underpinned by fictions of this kind, mythical fictions, it follows that any theory of change, if we want an alternative form of futures, we have to have a different kind of fiction. We need new fictions, new languages, new idioms, new frameworks, new guiding lights with which we can articulate relations that exist between society and the state, and the different kinds of questions that the state has to deal with. I think it is in that sense that I propose that we understand the idea of Medemer as a fiction, as a kind of performative concept. Does that make sense so far? Are you with me? Yeah? Good. Okay. Now, the first thing that I need to do develop this idea of Medemer as a performative concept. But before I do that, there are a couple of things that I need to do. That is, I want to explain that the political order in which we exist is constituted in a performative fashion. Performative logic undercuts, undergirds the constitution of the political order. So when we say the United States, Great Britain, Germany, Ethiopia, Kenya, and so on and so forth, the kinds of political realities that are associated with these states came into being through certain kinds of performative logic. Okay, that is one claim. I will develop the idea. The second claim that I would like to make is that individual subjects, you and I, every one of us, men, women, children, with all the meanings that attach to these identities, all of us are constituted through a certain kind of performative logic. Okay? The reason why, for example, a woman has certain kinds of political meaning, social meaning, is because of certain kind of performative configuration, performative signification or resignification. So I will also develop that idea. But first, these questions, the kinds of questions that we ask in terms of understanding these fictions, these performative ideas, it basically raises for us three different types of questions. Right? Three different types of questions. If the goal is to understand the ways in which new ideas can be used to deal with certain practical problems, challenges that we face, we need to ask these three questions. Questions that are semantic at the level, epistemic, and also metaphysical. So the first question that I will speak to is the question of how do we communicate and reason about possibilities which are remote from the way things actually are. And we have such a complicated, highly fractious political landscape where the different actors have such huge disparities in terms of their understanding of the Ethiopian state and also their vision of the future. How do we bring these different actors together? Especially to what extent does Medemer as an idea can help bring these different actors? So how do we communicate and reason? How do we discuss about Medemer, if this idea that we want to use, where things are different on the ground? Okay. So the idea is remote from the actual practice. How do we go about discussing that? The other question, which is slightly different, is the question of how can our experience in the actual world justify thought and talk about remote possibilities? So we all have certain experiences in life, right? And there are certain ideas that are out there, and we think those ideas are too far from our lived experiences. How do we go about thinking or engaging with those questions? And I think this is particularly relevant for Ethiopia. As I speak to a range of different people, because I try and straddle different corners or different camps, it seems to me that most people don't really have any idea of the conversations and debate that take place in other camps. They know what they want. Of course, they have their own experiences, and that experience informs their views of the different ideas that exist in Ethiopia. But actually, it doesn't accurately capture mediating our experience with that remote idea in terms of way that it can help us move forward. The metaphysical question, which I will not discuss, is the question of, do these remote possibilities exist independently from the actual world, or are they grounded in things that actually exist? So in terms of Medemer, for example, what this means is that if Medemer is the kind of possibilities that we want to realize, does it exist independently of the actual realities on the ground? Or is this something that is grounded in the realities that we... I think the way we answer this is absolutely essential. It is absolutely essential to the question of whether or not this idea works. Whether as a fiction or as a performative notion, it's important to understand this question, to make these distinctions when we at least theoretically engage with this issue. Now, as I said earlier, there's two claims that I want to make, and I will develop those two claims. The first claim is that the political order in which we live is constituted through performative logics. The second is that we, as political subjects, we are also creators through performative logic. If both political actors and the political order are creators through performative logic, that means performative becomes very essential, not just in terms of understanding the world that we live in, but also in terms of changing this world. Does that make sense? Yeah? የፖለቲካው ስርዓት የሚፈጠርበት ሁኔታ ፐርፎርማቲቭ የሆነ ሎጂክ አለው የምንል ከሆነ እዛ የፖለቲካ ስርዓት ውስጥ የሚኖረው እያንዳንዱ ግለሰብም እንደ ፖለቲካል ኤጀንት እንደ ፖለቲካል ሰብጀክት የተፈጠረው ፐርፎርማቲቭ በሆነ ሎጂክ ነው ካልን ፐርፎርማቲቪቲ ያለውን ስርዓት ከመረዳት አንፃርም ይህን ስርዓት በመቀየር ስናስብ in terms of changing existing relation ከዛ አንጻርም አስፈላጊ ይሆናል ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ የመጀመሪያ ስራ ምንድን ነው? ፐርፎርማቲቪቲ የሚለው ሀሳብ ምን ማለት ነው? ከየት የመጣው ስለሚለው ነገር ትንሽ ልና ከዛ እነዚህ ሁለቱ ሀሳብ እንዴት ነው ፐርፎርማቲቭ የሆኑት የሚለው ነገር ዴቨሎፕ አደርጋለሁ ማለት ነው። We still together? Yeah? ልጠይቃችሁ ትንሽ ላይ አይነት ነገሮችን Now, the idea of performativity was first put forward by British linguist John Austin in a book called How to Do Things with Words. Now, the book has a very funny title as well. It's actually a very serious work. Very serious work in the linguistics, the philosophy of language, and speech theory. So it is basically a foundational text for some of the kind of key deconstructive and critical work that came out in the 1960s and 1970s. It has been used primarily by feminist scholars. It's very influential in cultural theory. I think it's probably the second most influential work after Gramsci's work in cultural theory. But nevertheless, a very important concept in terms of thinking about the ways in which political orders, relationship of domination and equality can be conceptualized and at the same time can be reconfigured. But Austin thought of performativity in strictly linguistic terms, not in political terms. So he is the person who introduced for the first time the idea that language is not merely descriptive of the world that we live in, it's also constitutive, and it constitutes reality. It creates reality. A lot of us, when we talk in this country about the place of different languages, we think language is just like barrier. Language is actually a lot more than that. It creates reality, it generates so much complex meaning. Sometimes it determines the position of what becomes intelligible and not intelligible in the political sphere. And one of the most important distinctions that Austin makes is the distinction between quantitative statements and performative statements. And he says, quantitative statements are statements that simply describe something in the real world. If I say, for example, you have a zit on your head, or there are 45 people in this room, that is a quantitative statement, that's a quantitative utterance. And one of the defining features of quantitative statement is the fact that it's either true or false. What that means is that you can give it a truth value. The second category of utterances that Austin provides, and which is the most important for Austin, is what he calls performative utterances. And these utterances are utterances that perform something rather than describe something. And he says they perform something rather than describe, where the issuing of an utterance, for example, is the performing of an action. So you do something by saying something. And he says performatives are not true or false. They do not describe or report or constate anything at all. The uttering of the sentence or the uttering of the sentence is or is a part of the doing of an action. Okay. And some of the examples that he gives are so rudimentary because they are conceptualized specifically within the context of language theory. So some of the examples of performative utterances that he gives include saying, for example, I do take this woman to be my lawful wife in the context of marriage. Or when someone says, for example, I give them because my watch or my land or my house has occurs, for example, in a will. Right? Or when the judge, for example, in the context of a trial, says, I sentence you. Austin says, these are not descriptive utterances, but they are performative utterances. When you utter these statements, you are actually doing something, you are actually effecting something, you are bringing a new reality into being. He also says that in order for performative utterances to work, in order for them to be felicitous, he says, there has to be certain conventions, legitimizing and legitimizing conventions, he says. So for example, in the context of a marriage, the word I do generates a kind of performative meaning it generates only because we understand that context to be a context of marriage. So you have a well-known convention already that makes it work. And he says there must be an accepted conventional procedure. The persons and circumstances must be appropriate for the procedure. The procedure must be conducted by all the parties both correctly and completely, he says. Now, so he sets condition for what actually makes performatives work. Now, I don't want to go into the details and the nitty-gritties of these, but let me just point out at this point that he makes this distinction between felicitous and non-felicitous performatives halfway through his lecture. This is a book, by the way, published posthumously after he died. It was initially part of a lecture that he gave at Harvard University in 1963. The lectures were given in 1955, but published as How to Do Things with Words in 1963. So he revises halfway through his lecture. But what is interesting is that I don't think he understood the political potential of the ideas that he stumbled upon. He only conceptualized this idea strictly within the confines of language theory. So it was only in the 1960s and 1970s where people who work within theories of reconstruction came across this theory that it became a particularly useful instrument in terms of problematizing political orders. So the first such person to use the idea of performativity to critique, to analyze radically different spheres are these two people. Jacques Derrida on the right, Judith Butler on the left. And they use the idea of performativity to look at different things. Jacques Derrida used it to understand language, but most importantly, the ways in which political orders legitimize themselves, how they acquire the kind of reality they have. Judith Butler used this idea to problematize the ways in which gender identities come into being. So I'll talk about the work and the analysis that both of them have given us. And first I want to talk about the ways in which performativity becomes central to political orders. I want to take you back to 1674, the United States Declaration of Independence. So they were colonies at this point, and I want you to read this statement because these are questions that are both semantic and at the same time epistemic. What does the declaration say? It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness basically means property, okay, the right to property. And it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It didn't say these truths are self-evident. They say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Precisely because they said that, they made that assumption, they justified the creation of a new body politic that we call today the United States of America. This is America's birth certificate, right? And the way in which this document justified the creation of a new body politic, a new state, Derrida says is performative. But he didn't write about this first. He wrote about performativity in a very short essay called Signature Event Context. And this is what he says about performativity. This is not about political orders, but more about language theory, but also more to do with deconstruction. And he says the performative does not have its referent outside of itself or in any event before and in front of itself. It does not describe something that exists outside of language, and prior to it, it produces or transforms a situation it affects. If you look at this statement here in the declaration, the first paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So there is no antecedent reference here. They just said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and by making that claim, they justified a new thing that they brought into being, which is a new policy called the United States. And in 1976, on the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, he wrote an essay called The Declaration of Independence, and this is what he says. I think very significant for us as well. And he says, the we of the declaration speaks in the name of the people, but these people do not yet exist. They do not exist as an entity. It does not exist before this declaration, not as such. If it gives birth to itself as a free and independent subject, as a possible signer of the declaration, this can hold only in the act of the signature. The signature invents the signer. This signer can only authorize him or herself to sign once he or she has come to the end of his or her own signature. So in a sort of fabulous retroactivity, he says. Now, if you don't really fully understand what's going on here, don't worry. What I'm trying to do here is to develop that notion, the claim that I made, which is the political order is constituted through performative fashion. ያንን develop ያደረኩ ነው። ሙሉ ነገር ማይገባችሁ ከሆነ don't worry. ለኔም ትንሽ የማይገባኝ አንዳንድ ነገር አለ ውስጥ። So the point he's making here is that what is called the United States, right? The people, that people does not exist before this declaration. It is this declaration that created that people as a juridical political entity. So in the Madagascar, there are people who live there. In fact, there are people who lived there way before the whites arrived in the land. But the point here is that the juridical political entity that was created through this declaration. So the declaration brought something new into being. So that's what I mean when I say the political order that we live in is performatively constituted in that fashion. It's not just the United States body politic, but that applies to our own constitution as well. If you look at, for example, the preamble, first word, or the first few words in our constitution, this is a very performative statement that brings something new into being. We, the nations, nationalities, and peoples of Ethiopia, strongly committed in full and free exercise of our right to self-determination, to building a political community founded on the rule of law, Okay? Now, the important point here is that a political community called nations, nationalities, and peoples in Ethiopia did not exist before this constitution. I'm not making the claim that these nations did not exist. They did. It's a matter of empirical fact. But a political community at the level of the Ethiopian states that begins to describe itself as we, the nations, nationalities, and peoples of Ethiopia, did not exist before this constitution. It is this constitution that brought that into being. And of course, the range of institutional arrangements, political discourses that flowed from this new reality is something that we are still, I think, trying to understand, trying to debate, discuss, and see how, for example, as you can see here, the last bit, which is to do with the exercise of our right to self-determination, building a political community founded on the rule of law, capable of ensuring us, none of those things have been achieved, right? So we are still debating on how we can actually achieve that, and whether this particular configuration and other norms that are introduced into the Constitution had anything to do with our inability to bring about those ideas, those aspirations that are set out there. So that's basically what I mean when I say that the political order is brought into being through this kind of exercise, this kind of logic that is both semantic and epistemic. Okay. So have I established now, Yana? Political order, performative order, logic, if Okay, so let's look at second claim, which is that the political subjects, me, every one of you individually, with everything that identifies us as individuals, that reality comes into being through a performative fashion. But before I get that, because I draw here or into this particular idea of gender performativity, let me develop that idea and then I will try to extend the insight that emerges from that analysis to the idea of legal personality, because that's what kind of gives us a distinctive legal color. Now, this better builds on Nietzsche's idea that there is no being behind doing, the doing is everything, and she says there is no gender identity behind the expressions of gender. The gender identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. One of her famous work called Gender Trouble, she writes that gender proves to be a performance, that is, constituting the identity it is purported to be. In another important work, she says gender is the repeated stylization of the body, a set of repeated acts within highly rigid regulatory frame that congeal over time to produce the appearance of substance of a natural sort of thing. This is very important, especially the last bit. What gives the meaning of a woman, a man, that we have in our social imaginary, what gives it that particular color, a particular meaning, is performativity. It's the fact that when a child is born, the boy will be told certain stories, will be encouraged to behave in particular ways. The same goes for girls. And once they become adults, there are certain ideas, certain principles, certain expectations that are proposed, suggested, and imposed on them by their culture and society. They perform that. In the process of performing those expectations, norms that are imposed on them by society, they construct themselves as subjects. They construct themselves as subjects, and it's impossible to distinguish who you are from those practices, those cultural norms that are imposed on you by society. So in simplistic terms, this basically means we are a product of our society. But it's a lot more nuanced than that in terms of the relationship of discourses, knowledges, and power that goes to articulate that, again, identity. Now, if the gender identity that we have is articulated or configured through this performativity, then my claim is that legal personality is also an equally performative concept. So with legal persons, the reason why I cannot be sold, for example, is because the law considers me as a legal person. It gives me certain rights and also imposes certain duties on me. If I didn't have that particular identity as a legal person, then I would not have intelligibility in a particular political order. Okay? Just as, for example, when you find yourself in other countries, the rights and privileges that you have are very much limited, very restricted. So in the Ethiopian context, for example, this is a provision that basically tells us, or that constitutes us as a legal person. A human person is the subject of rights and duties from birth to death, says the Ethiopian civil law. But before this statement, right, you are just a human person, not necessarily a legal person. So my name is Awal Qasim Alo. I sometimes go by Awal Alo, but I'm actually Awal Qasim Alo. So the Awal Qasim Alo that is born on a particular date in a particular part of this country is actually different from the Awal Alo or the Awal Qasim Alo that appears on my passport or on my ID or national insurance, if you have national insurance, and the various credentials that I have. Those credentials that kind of confirm, authenticate my identity as an Ethiopian from a particular place and so on and so forth. and so on and so forth.
A relatively more developed country, your identity can be used for a range of different. What this means is that every time you go to institution, to university, to nationality, to those that are your personal identity. And the more you perform these things, the more you use them within institutions, because you are demanded, you are expected to use them, then you construct yourself as per the terms that are set by those structures, by those institutions. You might think that this is my right, of course it matter. But at the same time, what you are doing is that you are reproducing yourself as a product of that political order, that juridical order. So the point I'm trying to make here is not simply that legal personality is a fiction or a cognitive instrument that law uses to code the juridical universe. I'm basically saying that legal personality is a performative discourse that brings into being a particular kind of legal person that is subject to certain conditions, certain rules, but proudly accepts those rules and allows the perpetuation of a particular kind of political order. Now, is that point clear? How legal personality, legal one way get different into being a different kind of. Okay. Now, how does this relate to the idea? Here is so one of the points we are the individual subjects. If we are the individual subjects, if the political order in which we live and act, if the social order in which we live and act is also constructed through this performative logic, then understanding the political order, at the same time changing this political order, depends on our understanding of performativity. So performativity becomes an important notion. Not only political subjects and the political order, discourses are also performative, as you know, right? Discourses are performative. They bring into being the very thing they describe. Ostensibly describe የሚያደርጉ ይመስላሉ፣ ነገር ግን ሪያሊቲን ኮንስቲትዩት ያደርጋሉ፣ ሼፕ ያደርጋሉ። ኦኬ ሶ እነዚህ ሁለቱ ነገሮች ፐርፎርማቲቭ በሆነ ሎጂክ የሚፈጠሩ ከሆነ ዲስኮርስም የተለያዩ አጀንዳዎች ላይ የምናወራቸው ነገሮች ኦልሬዲ የሆነ ዲስኮርስ ውስጥ ነው ያለው። ዲስኮርስ ውስጥ ያለን በነገራችን ላይ we are already inside ላናውቀው እንችላለን። የምናወራው አሰር የምናደርገው ሁሉን ነገር ኢንፎርም ያደርግ ገቨርን የሚያደርግ ኦልሬዲ ፕሪኤምፕት አድርጎ ሪጉሌት የሚያደርግ የሆነ ዲስኮርስ አለ ውስጥ ነው። there is no exteriority ይላል ሚሼል ፉኮ። ራይት ይሄ እንዴት ነው ለመደመር አፕላይ ሊያደርግ የሚችለው? How does this analysis help us understand the idea of Medemer? Now, for me, Medemer is a discourse. It's not properly articulated, it's not fully elaborated, but it's really an emerging discourse. And the job of actually articulating, elaborating, elucidating, giving it meaning and content is our job. A lot of people are expecting that the Prime Minister should tell us what it means exactly, but I don't think that's the job of necessarily a single individual. It's for all of us to try to understand what it means and how it can be used. So for me, Medemer is a performative idea that intentionally weaves together multiple national identities, symbols, ideas, references, and images to shape a broader narrative about the country that we want to have. So as a term, it's imbued with certain power, certain reflexivity, question of agency. Reflexivity because it means different things to different people, right? Yeah, quality about it. But at the same time, it has an agency, which is very important in terms of how we talk about political discourse. What is the agency element here? Medemer. So it's not somebody else that is adding you are actually adding yourself to them. So a certain level of autonomy is embedded into the term. I think this is very important. Because when you talk about, for example, what are the terms, the conditions, Medemer cannot be, in my view. It cannot be about oneness. or making everyone essentially the same. Nor it is about crippling diversity or making any one single identity irrelevant or arbitrary. And in its best formulation, it's about building cross-cultural understanding, tolerance, respect, and acceptance to overcome the kinds of crises that we face as a country. So this is me being very normative. So if you have a radically different view of what Medemer is and what it should be, that's absolutely fine. Because this is a very normative project. Right? It tries or it seeks to change the world that we live in. So if you think I'm reading too much into it, yes, I am precisely doing that. Okay? Deliberately. It is an idea that demands that we take into account not only our needs and preferences, our experiences, but also the needs and preferences of those that are radically or ineradicably different from us. There are certain differences that are ineradicable. So it's also about understanding the wishes, demands, and interests of those that are very different from us in terms of how they imagine themselves, how they view history, what they want, and so on and so forth. So understood as such, it can be a principle of action and collaboration at the local, national, regional level. A principle that unlocks the energy of the collective, of interethnic community, to create new alliances and opportunity structures, therefore forming a new source of optimism in a country where optimism is in short supply. It's very critical for a more positive future. I think it's only that understanding of Medemer that can confront and deal with the challenges that we have as a country. Final point. In order for Medemer to work, of course certain conditions have to be met. These conditions are what are called iterability. Remember when I said earlier, when I talked about the states as the political order and gender, one of the things that emphasized is the idea that these juridical codes are repeated. So when I say gender is a performance and a performativity, it means the gender subject performs those cultural expectations, societal expectations. And through that performance, you construct yourself as woman, man, and so on and so forth. The same thing when it comes to the Constitution, because we invoke the Constitution every now and then. It's a kind of key principle that sets the tone for a new kind of community. So it's the starting point of everything. So the fact that there is this repeated citations, iterations, makes this juridical codes, the Constitution, and those cultural norms to create a new kind of reality. Citationality, iterability, and mineralogy. What does that mean in terms of the idea of Medemer? I think the fact that this is taken up by the Prime Minister of a country, who is also trying to embed or develop the idea as a theoretical concept or as a philosophical concept, means that there is an opportunity for this concept to be cited and iterated. So instead of, for example, a concept that is produced from the margin of politics, those concepts that are produced by power have more opportunity to be cited, to be repeated. Because the entire country, maybe at some point down the line, might start talking about it. Remember the ways that, for example, some of the key discourses that EBRDF used have become public parlance. Even when we are strongly against them, such as Parliament and stuff. Yeah? So if this idea of Medemer is understood in those constructive terms and is cited and repeated, the possibility of it doing the work that is intended to do is very good, right? But that, of course, depends on our ability to do the kind of serious intellectual work, serious thinking that it requires in terms of elucidating and elaborating this